If the test of a truly great book is that everyone feels compelled to pretend that they've read it, then there are few books greater than Edward Gibbon's The History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Gibbon's lengthy masterpiece stands alongside seminal works such as Marx's Capital and James Joyce's Ulysses as tomes that are recognized as essential reading for any self-professing intellectual, but are too long, too dense, and at times too obscure to actually wade through for all but the most devoted. Still, despite the fact that very few read Gibbon now, and even fewer believe that his work actually stands up to modern scrutiny, his conception of Rome's decline and fall has been remarkably influential in shaping not just how we view the end of the Roman Empire, but even the place of modern states on the grand stage of history. Though Gibbon's work as a historian is increasingly falling out of favor, for example, it is now recognized that even the question of the supposed fall of Rome is open to interpretation. But none can doubt his skill as a writer or a storyteller, with his eloquent prose bringing the ancient world vividly to life, even if his own aristocratic class background produces a blinkered perspective that has caused sections to age poorly. The eminently quotable Gibbon produces his best line in a commentary on the dimensions of Roman religion when he states, "The various modes of worship which prevailed in the Roman world were all considered by the people as equally true, by the philosopher as equally false, and by the magistrate as equally useful." This entire section has shaped the perception of Rome's religious landscape, even for those that are unfamiliar with Gibbon's work. The popular image of ancient Roman religion is of superstitious plebeians prostrated before shrines, groping for some small divine favor to improve their miserable lot in life, while sophisticated philosophers sneer at these rubes in their enlightened rejection of supernatural entities, and cunning politicians exploit the reverence of the masses for cynical purposes, all while secretly laughing at the credulous faith of the believers. It should come as no surprise that a portrait this crudely drawn is oversimplified in the extreme, and cannot take into account the diverse religious traditions of Rome, much less its broader empire, at any point in history, never mind the entire timeline of the Roman state. But before deconstructing why this interpretation of Roman religion is false, we must examine the forces that produced it. For the reduction of the Roman polytheistic religious tradition is much simpler when every voice unequivocally backs the idea that there was no authentic religious belief, feeling, or commitment among Roman pagans. For hundreds of years now, Christians and secular historians alike have interpreted Roman religion as fundamentally flawed, little more than a pale shadow of what a true, robust religion should be and what it should offer its adherents. The Christian interpretation being that this deficient religious framework prepared the way for a true and universal faith to take hold, one that could be embraced with actual zeal. Conversely, those of a more secular bent are quick to overplay notes of skepticism among some elite sources to create a fictional society that can be portrayed as untainted by the corrosive impact of dogmatic faith. Two sides that would agree on very little, then, both have a vested interest in uniting here to claim that Romans didn't really believe in their gods, that they simply completed empty rituals for their political effect, without placing any credence in the supernatural forces they were designed to placate. This interpretation, however, has serious drawbacks. For starters, we must not let the praxis of modern monotheistic religions provide our framework for what a religion must be. It is a testament to the astounding success of the Abrahamic creeds that even among sophisticated observers today, the religious feelings of the ancient Romans are discounted because they never claimed personal relationships with the gods, sought out moral guidance from the divine, or felt that they were truly loved by their deities. Furthermore, Roman religion appears deeply transactional to us because Romans valued public displays of devotion and sacrifice over interior prayer or private faithfulness. Culturally conditioned as we are, this makes it easy to be cynical about the Roman application of religion. If you're enjoying this video, please do us a favor by liking, commenting, and subscribing. We're a small channel, and this is the only way to get the almighty YouTube algorithm to notice us. Furthermore, you can help Tribunate become more sustainable by becoming a member for as little as 99 cents a month. Thank you for all of your support. We must remember that ideas such as personal relationships with the divine and private prayers being the only way to authentically believe are reflective of our predominantly Christian cultural background. Divergent folkways can lead to drastically different mindsets and worldviews. Nowhere is this more evident than in the study of ancient Roman religion. For example, they may even have accused us of impiety and mocked our religions because we pray without offering sacrifice. This would have been an affront to their ideas of the divine, and a Roman would have imagined we did not really respect religion without tangible sacrifices to accompany our professions. The criticism that traditional Roman religion offered no personal dimension is largely true, but we must not let our deeply modern conceptions of the person and the individual obscure how Romans thought about such matters. There was no private aspect to Roman religion because there was hardly a private aspect to Roman society at all. People were thought of as members of the Roman state or part of certain families well before they were considered to be discrete individuals. It should be little surprise, then, that the practice of Roman religion takes place in the context of the state and the family. But this feeds another common criticism of Roman religion, that it was overtly political in character and was deeply intertwined with the Roman state itself. In a famous passage, Polybius praises the religious devotion of the Romans, and at the same time lauds how effective the state cults are at facilitating social control. This was one of the key aspects that Gibbon highlighted to indicate why the enlightened Romans preserved outmoded religious systems, that they didn't actually believe, but that the unifying effect of religion on Roman political life meant that it could serve as a key lever in manipulating the masses. For example, omens and prodigies were often touted to influence political proceedings, something that was made easier by the stranglehold that aristocrats had on the priestly positions. For the Roman pontifex needed no special theological training to hold the post. Instead, good breeding was the only requirement, as a Roman priest never answered questions about religious dogma or provided counseling to the community at large during times of grief or hardship. Even the vaunted Pontifex Maximus, who stood at the apex of the priestly colleges, played no role in ensuring dogmatic conformity or guaranteeing that all Rome's priests upheld certain religious principles. The position was instead political, and in the Republic was typically the domain of the leading senior statesmen, men renowned for their political success and wealth, not religious devotion. This seems to confirm to us that there were no actual religious principles at play, just elite Romans seeking to influence popular opinion by inventing divine prerogatives that protected their privileged positions. But instead of reading this as incontrovertible proof that Roman religion really was no more than an opiate for the masses, we must recognize that this criticism rests on the assumptions shaped by monotheism. We view church and state as separate entities, or at least as entities that should be separate. Romans didn't just fundamentally disagree, but they would have lacked the language and conceptual ability to even entertain the idea. So while the critics are right to an extent, Roman religion was inherently political. Every aspect of life in Roman society was so deeply connected to religious rites, taboos, and observances that it would be foolish to even attempt to define where religion ended and politics began. But that doesn't mean there weren't authentic feelings, hopes, and emotions attached. We must not let our beliefs about how a religion should be practiced affect our interpretation of what a religion can actually be. The best example of this is in how Romans thought of priests in such radically different terms than us, as previously outlined. The idea of religious vocation obligating a sense of involvement with and devotion towards the community of believers is a modern one. The Latin word for priest, pontifex, originally meant bridge builder, and it is in this sense that we must think of Roman priests, because it is how they thought of themselves, as bridges from the divine world to the material realm. According to their theological understanding, the actions and invocations of these priests channeled supernatural forces and divine order into our chaotic world. Their responsibilities did not involve providing spiritual counseling to a grieving widow. Why would men so great as them need to concern themselves with personal anguish? They thought they were upholding the Roman state, and its divinely ordained position through their actions, so there were clearly much bigger issues at play that required their attention. By securing the blessings of the gods, priests secured Rome's place as the hegemon of the Mediterranean. But the divine order not only confirmed Rome's position among the nations, but also reinforced the existing Roman social hierarchy. It is for this reason that I believe religious practice and devotion were actually more pronounced among the Roman elite than the plebeian underclass. Rome's religion was in effect the worship of the status quo, and it naturally follows that those who benefited the most from their social position would be inclined to believe that they merited their status by divine right. So the continued use of religion to influence politics by the elite should not be read as a cynical exploitation of plebeian piety, but as a heartfelt conviction that by attempting to carry legislation that threatened the status quo, certain members of the aristocracy had authentic religious convictions that this would risk insulting the gods and their preferred order, meaning that it could preclude Rome from divine favor and bring calamity upon all. The fact that this belief was so self-serving does not preclude it from being in some sense authentically held. We are all susceptible to having personal advantage influence our beliefs on politics, economics, and even religion, for no one is a true blank slate capable of pure rational thought. Perhaps the foremost example of this phenomenon in action was Caesar's co-consul Bibulus frequently announcing the citing of ill omens to prevent votes from being taken on Caesar's radical populist legislation. This is often held up as a cynical ploy to halt Caesar's efforts to restructure Roman society in a way that favored the plebeians. But if we assume that Bibulus honestly believed that a reduction in senatorial authority was akin to overthrowing the divinely sanctioned order, then it makes sense that a mind racked by these apprehensions would interpret everything from the flight of birds to the tilt of a statue or even the sounds of thunder as ominous messages from the heavens demanding he forestall the looming affront to the divine. This naturally doesn't mean he was right to oppose Caesar on these pretexts, but because Roman religion was so inherently political, especially for the elite, we can't assume religious convictions played no part in his decisions. The example of Bibulus also highlights how the activism of the plebeian masses for social change naturally meant advocating for a different understanding of religious doctrine and practice than the view favored by the elite. Indeed, it is not hard to conceptualize stalwart plebeians becoming disillusioned with the gods if they were constantly used to reify a social system that relegated them to such a pitiful state. True, our sources do often speak of the poor masses as hopelessly superstitious and undiscerning in their dealings with the divine. But the very act of mobilizing to demand social change indicates that they were not as easily hoodwinked as is often portrayed. Besides, we must recall that all of our documentary sources come from the elite, and they constantly depict the plebeians as an unruly rabble that is easily swayed by any speaker. The degradation of plebeian intellect is a constant tactic intended to subtly remind the reader of the aristocracy's God-given right to rule over them. While the upper class had the time, money, and disposition to become well-versed in literature, philosophy, and art, we must not accede to the inherently reactionary framing of those who present the elite as intrinsically smarter than the plebeians. They may have been more cultured, but there's no reason to believe that they were more rational or better critical thinkers. In fact, we have better evidence for the opposite proposition. So while I'm inclined to interpret the rich as on the whole more religiously devoted than the poor, we must avoid coming to the reductive conclusion that the dynamics of Roman religion were defined by patrician zealots on one side and plebeian atheists on the other. The reality is that Rome was far too multifaceted for any oversimplified interpretation that demarcates Romans into clearly defined camps of belief and non-belief. There was rather a continuum of belief that manifested in a broad number of ways, from philosophers who believed that all the gods were allegorical to those that loudly maintained adherence to the old creeds. But the one thing that didn't exist on this spectrum was anyone holding to a position that was comparable to modern atheism. For despite the skeptical nature of some writers, such as Cicero, Lucretius, and Lucian, Even the harshest critics of Roman religion were fervent believers in the supernatural. They simply would have supposed that the divine manifested in a different manner than traditional Roman doctrines. For though Roman religion is often derided as being simply about rituals and practices, the all-encompassing nature of these acknowledgments of the divine indicates that their religion was based on authentic beliefs held by the Romans. All the Romans. Religion was so pervasive and enchanted every aspect of life to such a degree that even comprehending the possibility of the non-existence of anything beyond the material was too absurd to contemplate. Roman sources do often speak of declining religious devotion, but in reality, all of these are little more than efforts to amplify a perception of supposed modern disorder with an idealized past, a simple use of the nostalgia effect, and something that is employed even today as traditionalists bemoan a lost past when everything seemed so much better. Just as the fish doesn't know it is wet, so the ancient Roman wouldn't have even considered that acknowledging the supernatural was an act of faith or something that required reconciliation with his intellect. The gods, the virtues, the forces were all the heart of a heartless world. They animated the very cosmos, and whether or not a Roman believed their existence could be properly understood, according to the myths, he knew that they simply were present. The existence of a multiplicity of divine agents was as evident as the state and society they undergirded. But as the Republic yielded to an empire that owed its allegiance to one single individual, the princeps saw the need to likewise unify Roman theology under a single head. Though the imperial divinity cult did not place the emperor at the top of the pantheon, he became the central figure, as honors to him and his genius became ever more mandatory. It is here, in the emergence of the emperor cult, that Roman religion as a tool of the powerful and a reinforcement of the status quo reached its inevitable conclusion, when refusing to honor the current emperor was likened to a hatred of the divine and the meticulously ordered world. But like Icarus, the imperial cult flew too close to the sun, and in its boldness it illuminated for all to see the actual shape and function of Roman religion, as well as all the brutality it necessitated as an appendage of the Roman state. The door was opened for something new. Religions from the East that had long vied for the loyalty of Romans enjoyed a surge in popularity, and one, the worship of a crucified Jewish preacher, that was perhaps the strangest of them all, began to gain adherents. But even as Christianity took root in Rome and eventually became the dominant faith, the ostensibly monotheist Roman Christians had a hard time coming to accept that once revered gods such as Jupiter, Ares, Vesta, and Juno didn't actually exist. Belief in these deities was so culturally conditioned that early Christians borrowed Neoplatonic ideas and talked of the traditional Roman gods as demons meant to deceive mankind away from the worship of the one true God. It was that difficult to fully sever the long-standing milieu of paganism in one fell swoop. The existence of these gods was so apparent to all that even Christians were initially unable to deny them. In a later video, we will discuss how Roman ritual and ideas about the divine influenced emerging Christian practice, but suffice it to say, there is still a kernel of Roman philosophy, theology, and devotion in the practice of the world's largest religion. It is fitting, then, that for a people who were so fundamentally religious, that a religion would be Rome's lasting legacy to the world, and that the Pontifex Maximus who sits in Rome today keeps some bare embers of the classical past and ancient tradition alive, because for all its faults, this is the final bridge to antiquity. Contra Gibbon, Rome has declined, but has not yet fallen.